Happy Thursday.
Yep.
Hey there, Sam. I haven't seen you in a bit. How's it going today?
Hello, it's going okay. How are you?
Doing all right. See, 3BSD doing their meetings over there. Seems like things are going well.
Yeah, some of the meetings are not at a time that I'm able to attend, so I'm not really up to speed on everything that's going on.
Calendar Tetris is not an easy game to play.
No, especially across time zones.
I think my 2 actionable items in image spec Tianan has already answered over there, so I'll have to find someone else to pick on. Maybe Saji will show up. And Jory already pinged me, said that she won't be able to make it today, so maybe missing a few. It's also summer vacation time for folks. I'm going to hold off on sharing my screen this time, just knowing that I have to double up the Zoom sessions or deal with crashing my Zoom at the end of the meeting. Josh, long time no see.
It has been a while. How are you?
Doing all right. Saw you working over on the conformance side. Thank you for that.
Oh yeah, it's been that's also been a while.
So you might have missed, you might be able to help out on some of this. Last week we were chatting about potentials to rework some of the conformance stuff. I've been debating, do I want to dramatically redesign the conformance test to be more of a matrix of different kinds of data we can push to the registry, and then all the different APIs. And so you'd run multiple passes of, let me try to push this data, let me try to query this data, let me try to delete this data across a regular image, across an index, an artifact with refers in it, all that kind of stuff. So the different kinds of data we have that we want to talk about pushing, people looking at different digest types. And a lot of this is going to be optional because we're looking at a bunch of maze inside of the spec. And so if we were to do something like that, it'll be a dramatic redesign of all the conformance test, but the UI is somewhere that I would need a lot of help of how do you represent all those changes in our UI that right now it's just 4 boxes of check, check, check of you've done these 4 tests.
Yeah, it's it's all like markdown tables. So there's I can walk you through at some point, but using Go, we look at the results like the JUnit XMLs and then somehow parse out of that into a table. So if you could keep it into a JUnit XML, there's probably a way to do it. And that, I think the JUnit is something that we get using one of the like Go Mega or one of the weird testing libraries.
Yeah.
But open to open to a complete redo. It's not the most it's not the most well architected.
I
Yeah.
realized when I was trying to add the SHA-512 test that I was duplicating so much stuff all over the place, and it was becoming very difficult to try to maintain that. And I figured, okay, the next thing we're going to add is going to be even more. You know, the complexity just keeps growing and growing and growing over there, since it's very much designed around push a single image across all this stuff and do all the tests, and then everything else just kind of been bolted on top of that. So it's part of the thought process. I would probably look at trying to pull out some of those test harnesses. I know Ron wants to try to keep them all. And so if I was to pull out a bunch of those test harnesses, I would have to find an alternative for the JUnit library. I imagine there are a few of them out there, but I'd have to go looking.
I would say a complete redo is not out of the question, so long as the results are somehow parsable by the thing we want to build the main UI for all of the vendors. I think that's just something I don't think JUnit's really even a good fit for it, but somehow an output that we could consume.
What are your thoughts if
So
that output changed from just 4 boxes to kind of a 2-dimensional list of here are all the kinds of data types, here are all the APIs we're doing? And I don't know that we necessarily have to draw it as a grid. It could just be 2 lists, but extending that from just the 4 items it is now to a bunch of items.
I think I have no, yeah, I don't really have strong opinions either way. I think it was nice with the 4 items just because that's the way we broke it down. But I think our rule was like if you can do the pool side of things, then you're conformant. And I think people like to see green boxes instead of red X's. So maybe at least allow people a way to skip it so that they don't look like a bunch of red all over if they don't want to like look, we're doing the kind of bare minimum. So
I'm imagining a bunch of gray boxes of I skipped this test rather
yeah,
than red X's of I failed the test.
yeah, that sounds good to me.
Because from the user standpoint, a lot of people are asking, can I trust this registry is going to support the new data I'm pushing? And so it's useful for them to still see if there's something there. All right, so that was kind of high level. We might revisit that, but let's see. Over in the list, I've got a couple quick actionable items here. So let's see, the removing the IRC link should be a quickie. And let's see, we don't have John here. We don't have Steve-O. Oh, actually, Tianon, you can do this one. You're even on the original there. Done. Man, that was quick and easy. You even beat me to the merge button. I was trying to get there. So that one's knocked out. There is another one for the manifest size limit. This one we might just want to discuss. It's 781. And for the manifest size limit, when I was looking at this, open the link up on my screen so I can read it off. The conclusion I think we were looking at the end was we did say in distribution spec that there's an expectation that clients won't exceed a certain limit, or maybe reverse, that registries will support at least a certain amount, and the different APIs of if that doesn't happen. And so is there any language we need to add to image spec, or are we comfortable with what distribution spec says? And if people want to make their own stuff on image spec that exceeds this for their own personal purposes, that's kind of outside of our concern. thoughts one way or another on that?
I don't see a compelling reason for image spec to define stricter limits than distribution spec, or even, let me rephrase that. I don't see a reason for image spec to define limits. I don't see a compelling anything. Like, maybe I need to reread this thread. Maybe there's a compelling use case in here, but no, even Jimmy's OP is just, we should have a limit, which I would imagine is grounded in the distribution spec, not in the image spec. And the distribution spec already has a limit.
And this discussion is from back in 2019, 2020, before we had done this in distribution spec.
Yeah.
And welcome, Sajay. We're chatting about 781 right now. I'll repost the link since I think you joined just after I shared that one.
Yep. If you object to closing it, you might want to speak up, because I'm going to write a comment and close and comment, which I guess we can reopen after that, but it's coming.
It gets a thumbs up to close from me. I think the biggest interest here might be Sajay, who's just walking into this and being like, wait, what?
In redefining the limits in multiple places are confusing. I would say have the limit in one place, but
I think that's where I am too. And we've already got the limit and distribution specs, so no need to do it twice. All right, Dianon, I think that's your thumbs up to go with that.
Yeah, I'll take that one.
Thanks.
I like closing things.
Closing things is fun. All right, going on down the list. Image spec layout was a question this past, not too long ago. Well, originally long ago, and then it kind of got resurfaced by me looking at old issues and saying, hey, do we need to close out some of these old issues or figure out how to resolve them? In the 8.11, share this link. In that old issue, I think the problem comes about that the image spec defines the layout and says, here is an annotation you can use inside the layout, because we've got the index.json, which to me is kind of like the poor man's tag listing, because it has an annotation in there and it says, when you see this annotation, expect it to be a tag value. Potentially implementation can do something different with that, but we define that most implementations just use it for a tag value. And so you can use that to look up all the different multiple manifests that are in the same index.json file, and then all the data inside your content addressable store. If you do that, it's not really conducive to having multiple repositories all copied into the same OCI layout. And so there have been annotations people use. I think Containerd has their annotation that says if you're putting this data inside of here, here's the upstream repository we copied it from. There are other tools out there that look at a OCI layout and say this is itself is a repository. And so they treat that directory as a repository separate from the upstream registries that they're talking to. They're not really seen as the same thing. They're potentially you're copying data from one place to another, but they're seen as separate things, and each one is its own repository. So I kind of wanted to look for feedback here about how people see this being used. Do we need to support it being used both as a transport of data where you're tracking what the upstream registry is, versus as a repository itself where you're treating it as just its own location, its own tag listing you're looking at? Do we need to support both cases? You support a completely different case out there. How should we treat this?
I think I need to reread this thread in more detail because I'm actually failing to understand why and how we're failing to support both cases today. Does it come
I
down
think-
just to the ref.name annotation definition?
I think the fact that our annotation right now is just for a tag and not for the upstream repository the content was copied from, that's where they're seeing the issue.
Because I think there's probably enough cases of tools using that annotation in the more charitable way, as evidenced by all the examples in this thread of tools generating content that is using that annotation in a different way than what we have defined.
So there's also container D itself, where I think they add another annotation that's specific to container D.
Our definition for ref.name is already generous enough for this. We're already there.
We do have a weak definition, but that does mean that
No,
there
it's
is.
got like RBNF and everything. It's not a weak definition. It's like full on. This is a full ref or can be a full reference.
The container D annotation that I've seen is io.containerd.image.name that they use.
Yeah, which is sane and reasonable because container D is creating that annotation and consuming that annotation. And so they wanted to make sure that it had a stricter definition. Because ref name can be generalized, but they, as far as I recall, container D code does read the ref name and use the ref name if it's available and correct and something meaningful. I recall CTR import, whichever, I think it's CTR image import, has flags even to control how the ref name gets used. Not that CTR is a user-facing command, disclaimer, but it's a good proxy for container D already has this functionality. Yeah, and as Ron points out in the comment, like ref name is already scoped to only being valid in index.json in an OCI layout, which is already defined as a multi-image construct. And it's defined right here in the annotations as being a full reference, or at least that a full reference is valid.
Yeah,
So
and
I'm back around to failing
as,
to see the problem.
It's defined as a multi-image structure. It's not necessarily defined as a multi-repository structure. So I'll have challenges if I treat it as just a repository with tags in it. If someone wants to copy two different latest tags into the same layout directory, I consider those conflicting on my side because I treat that as a tag and it's just like you're overriding a tag.
But the ref.name can specify a full reference.
Can, but for me, I treat that directory as its own repository. It's not.
Okay, that's
It's
fine,
not a
but the
transport.
spec says otherwise. So that's more on you than it is on the spec, right?
It is how people are using it. And so it's a question of what is that directory? Is it a repository or is of its own thing, or is it a transport of content from another location? Yeah, I can do a Docker build kit build and output to an OCI layout, and there is no upstream registry. Sasha, I see your hand up. Go ahead.
I can share another use case because we went through this discussion before we even brought it to OCI and decided not to bring it to OCI. So we move a bunch of images on tar, as tar into different environments. And we discussed how can we take the same image, multiple ref names across repositories, but we have to move it as one archive. So pretty much needed something like a catalog, but an index JSON means you have to duplicate the manifest and all that. So I think the transport semantic is slightly different, where you might need more than the OCI layout supporting. I think it's a new scenario is what I'm trying to say. So if you want to support the same image with multiple tags, the single ref name annotation could be used with the duplicate manifest, but that's something that we don't specify. And it's kind of odd in the index to have the same manifest. Maybe it's okay, but because the spec doesn't close it down. But I think if it's a transport construct, we should probably define how that tar might look, and maybe it's not just about standardizing the annotation, but it's more about we should probably define the use case. So is this issue just about making sure that ref can be fully qualified? Is that what we're trying to say?
I think the issue itself is saying they want to treat it as a transport, and so they want to include whatever the upstream registry is in one way or another.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I feel it's like it's a new use case to some extent. I mean, we've seen the layout be used for maybe single or a couple of images. Most of the scenarios have been around single images, so it would be tricky to say that we support multiple images, cross repository, and those kind of things. But that would be a least of a hack definition if it's not a proper use case, right? Or maybe it's fine. I'm not sure.
There are definitely a lot of people using it for a lot of different things.
Right, and so we didn't want to hijack that when we did the OCI layout for, I know for ACR, they created a catalog file that was the mapping of, hey, this digest or this manifest goes into this specific thing. And this is a persistence format that we use, not a transport registry format. So we debated kind of like, hey, should they bring that to OCI or not? But we stepped away because we weren't sure how many people wanted that. I think my concern is we could say that we want the fully qualified ref name as a standard, but we're kind of trying to shoehorn a use case without probably considering everything. Maybe that's okay, but I think maybe just being explicit that why we want to do this might be necessary.
But the fully qualified ref name is already in the definition of the annotation. It's already valid. And it's valid not to do that too. It's valid not to have an annotation at all. Right.
The problem is that the layout, everybody uses the tag, and there's no concept of a tag that maps to the actual repository tag schema, right?
Not everybody uses just a tag, as evidenced by the examples in that issue.
Right.
Those are real world examples, are they not?
Yeah, I guess so.
Trying to figure out real world examples from what tool. Trying to look through. I'm seeing the text you can output to that. I guess we're looking at the November 2nd discussion there. He's saying the index would look like, and said here was a reference with the full reference in there. And yeah, you can have a tool that does do that, but was he pointing to an actual tool that did that? Tendo Ryosage, everybody I've seen doing this is using it as just a tag.
BuildKit doesn't.
BuildKit likes to be different, don't they?
Oh, BuildKit does. And they do the container D one. That's silly.
That's what a lot of us have been doing.
That's what I've seen as well, because we have BuildKit all around the place, and we found that that's typically maybe that's fixable.
Yeah, so I should make a PR to BuildKit that fixes that and points to the spec as justification for fixing that, because ref name is a fully qualified ref.
I feel like the alternative to fixing that in BuildKit and using a different notation would be to harden the spec down and say, look, everybody has been using this just a tag. This is in practice we look at when we go out and look in the field. Everybody's using this just a tag. We should add another annotation that is upstream repository of some kind.
But the CBNF grammar has been in the spec since 1.0. Like it's always been defined this way.
I mean, the plus side to that is if you have a tool that's actually doing that, then it becomes easier to have the spec as a. We've always been like a trailing spec we discussed, right? So, I mean, either way, it's goodness. If we want to have BuildKit change that. Another new annotation will take a significant amount of time for tooling to probably absorb, or
I wouldn't expect things to change overnight. Now, my impression is that tools would probably default to the container D one for a long while still, but would probably
Why not just
support,
document the container D one?
because it's container D's to document, not ours.
I mean, it's in wide use. Not
Because
documented. I mean, not documented in the spec way of like prescribing how it's used, but document it as, hey, by the way, if you're looking at this ref name annotation, here's how it's typically used in other tools. And there's also this other annotation that's commonly used in other tools for the thing you're probably actually looking for, because our annotation got used wrong in a lot of tools, even though the spec has always said that it should be a full reference.
I don't think we've always said that it's been a
Literally from version 1.0, it has always had this EBNF grammar. I just did the get blame.
I need to click more of your links now. Which link am I supposed to be clicking here?
All of them. All my links are good. Here, that latest one is a commit that changed the eBPF grammar, but not in any actual way, that is in version 1.0. The original version of the spec. Way back in RC7 of 1.0. Back in 2017.
Is this the grammar for that annotation?
Yes. This is the grammar for the .image.ref.name annotation.
Okay.
you need to fix that in the index. The examples are kind of don't indicate that, and that's typically where people run off, right? So look at that. Oh, okay, it looks good. There's no reason to put a registry in there. It's like
there's all the reason in the world. And now it's going to break a bunch of tools, which is even more reason. Let's do it.
But the EBPMF, I can say the letters in the right order there. That doesn't require that the registry name be in there. It's saying you could have it.
No, it's all should. You can put anything in there. You could put the entire text of War and Peace in there if you really want to.
It should conform to that character set. And then also in there, here's the language of the order, but nothing in there says that it should include the registry name. So a tag still fits within that text.
Sure. Yeah, I'm not saying that the way that it's being used is wrong. I'm saying that the way that people seem to want to use it is also not wrong. it's also correct. And any tool that can't handle that is the thing that's wrong. If I put a full reference in ref.name, the spec supports that. And that's totally reasonable. It's funny that it uses the must keyword, but without capitalizing it. I don't know if that was intentional or not.
Yeah, like anytime you capitalize, that's the intentional time.
Just to recap, what I'm understanding is that the full ref name is a valid output already. I mean, there's nothing required to change in the spec. That's all,
Yeah,
right?
the examples don't show it, but the spec
Correct,
itself is
correct.
very, very, very clear that a full ref name is valid in this annotation.
Yeah, I don't debate that at all. I agree that we have said that in the spec. My take is that in practice, almost nobody does that. And so I wouldn't be objecting to the spec tightening that down and saying, look, you could do this in the past. Implementers note, be aware, people could have done this. But in practice, we never saw that. We're a trailing spec. Here's the usage that we think makes the most sense. And if you wanted to include a registry name, here's the annotation you should be doing. And oh, by the way, as a implementers note, a lot of people are using this containerd reference for the same task.
So you want to codify the crappier behavior that requires people to use a separate non-OCI annotation for the thing that they actually want?
I want to make an OCI annotation, but document that people are using a non-OCI annotation as well. But make it another annotation.
I think that's where I'm hearing the disagreement. I'm just trying to be mediator here, so please don't shoot the messenger. When you're kind of proposing a new annotation, but I'm hearing Tianan say that the ref name is already supports the fully qualified name, so we could standardize on that. Does that summarize the what do you say, the for and against of the discussion?
Yeah, and the reason I lean toward another annotation is just because depending on how you're using this, that other annotation has a very different meaning to different people. And so some people might see this as this is a copy of content I'm being pulled from upstream. And so when I import it in, so it's like an import-export format. For anybody that treats this location as a repository in and of itself, that tag name is just a tag, and to try to dereference it with multiple things means you're getting tag collisions in there. And so it makes it more clear for people that are using it as a representation repository that if you have collisions on that name field, that's just a tag, that you do have collisions in those scenarios. And for example, I will have an OCI layout as a valid reference that you can pass to any of my commands. But the end of that is not a full repository name and a tag and everything else. It's just the tag inside of that OCI layout. Or a digest. You could do the @ and the SHA digest to pin to a specific manifest inside of that layout.
No, I'm just reading the comments in the chat.
Yeah,
I
me
think
too.
Mike is also leaning towards expanding the example and maybe adding a conformance test first, so that the ref name is assumed to be fully qualified by other tools. I think the full annotation might be a second round discussion. I'm not saying it's not important. It's more like these seem to be separate discussions altogether.
I'm opposed to requiring a full name.
No,
Because
I don't think the question is requiring the full name. I think the point is the full name is supported in the spec, and people who want to use it can use it. The same way we have a sample for an XML manifest, which technically is not supported anywhere. But the spec doesn't stop you from having an arbitrary manifest artifact type in a registry or whatnot. So I think the specification is loose enough. People can interpret it how they want to. And the examples could show the extent of how you can use it, but and maybe guide you in the right way. Is I think good thing.
yeah,
The new annotation is going to be harder to standardize. It might take more time, is what I'm thinking. But I'm okay either way.
I support it to read from a layout that has the full name in there, but I don't support it to write. And if I'm reading and the tags are colliding, it's whichever one I happen to pick.
We don't distinguish between read and write of the layout, right? We just say this is the layout. This is how it should be laid out. And tools are free to produce or consume from the layout, right?
Yeah. I mean, the reason that I hesitate for the full name in my own tooling is because I treat it as a repository. I treat it as its own thing that you're writing to in that case.
Yeah. I think it's fair in the sense that you could fail saying that you don't support multiple repositories or anything like that, or you don't want to support the scenario. But that would be something that. But the point is, what I think what I'm hearing Tianan say is this has been the behavior. So if we didn't support a fully qualified ref name, those are the places that probably need to reason with what happens. Or if you want to, or the other side would be you actually want to not say ref name, or you want to not use that grammar and say, okay, it should be just a tag name or a string of the tag with the regex or something like
I think the flip is interesting to me, which is how many tools are going to work if we don't have a registry repository name in there? And how many are just going to break flat out because they're looking for this field? They need that repository name. And they're treating this as a transport. So if they don't have the repository name in some way, they're going to break because they
I
need
know
that
from the
name.
client side, or as it's been painful, because I know whenever I speak to Shoei, it's like, the ref name is usually just a tag. And if you could support that, then it'd be easier. Even finding the repos and all that within the layout has been a problem, right? So multi-repositories, I haven't seen anybody use it yet, but maybe there's examples in the wild. But what I'm learning today is that the specification already supports it, so it's up to us whether we want to recommend an example. Sorry, I don't have any more words. I'm done.
Yeah. Well, to flesh out the thing I was thinking of is that take container D. Can you have an image referenced in container D that doesn't have a repository? And I think the answer is no, you have to have a repository in there somehow. You might make up a repository name, but I feel like it's probably required over there. Correct me if I'm wrong. We got a lot of people who know this better than I do. And they're all being quiet. They're probably frantically scanning code right now. Because I'm thinking of an ideal world. It would be really neat if you could, in containerd, just say, hey, run this thing. It's local on my file system. And the repository is a path on the local file system and not some upstream registry name. All right, we've beaten this one a whole bunch. Oh, Mike's jumping in.
No,
No, no, you don't want to jump in?
we can import files, but
You can
I have
import files.
tested you can do that without it imagining a registry. I haven't tested it.
Yeah. I imagine if you import it and it doesn't have the registry in there, you have to on your import say, this is the registry name for this repository name, some way, somehow.
Maybe. It's a tar file.
That's just it. And to me, I feel like there are a lot of really interesting use cases that get opened up if you're just passing around a tar file from step to step. Thinking of CI pipelines, I built this image. I don't know where I pushed it to yet. Maybe I'm going to push it to 5 places. Maybe I'm going to push it to 0. Let me pass this around and be able to use it, sign it, add all my data to it, get the validation, and then ship it.
Yeah.
So it opens up different use cases for me.
Yeah.
All right. We've beaten that one a whole bunch there. Next on the list, after all that discussion here, registry proxy features. This is distribution spec 66. Thanks, Sajay. Or he already dropped it, didn't he? Yeah. So this one's been sitting around for a long while. And I don't think we have all the right people on this one to chat about it, but just something I wanted to throw in the very end here was to think about how this is going to look when we have both old registries and or old clients that are trying to work with this proxy stuff. If you have an old client trying to proxy to a new registry that's going to be a proxy for multiple upstream registries, how does it handle when the client doesn't tell it which registry to talk to proxy for? And vice versa, if you have a client that knows how to pass this header of here is which registry I want you to proxy for, and it talks to an old proxy, it doesn't know that. How does that client interact with that proxy server so that it doesn't think that it's getting it back an image that's not valid? I'm trying to avoid the case where we have the was it dependency confusion attacks? Is that the right term for it? I think so. Or basically, we don't have that today inside of OCI because everything is fully qualified. We always say, here's the repository we're going to for this content. The second you have a proxy in there that just uses a header to disambiguate which registry it's talking to, I worry we're going to create that attack scenario with proxy servers. But again, I don't think we have the right people. I think this is much better if we get Derek on this one because he's been leading this a lot. Thoughts on that? Otherwise, I will jump ahead.
Yeah, I reviewed it a long time ago. I didn't have any problems with the idea. I just had some nit fixes that needed to be done.
Yeah. When I first looked at it, I thought this looks nice, but then when I started thinking about what happens when you start mixing versions, I started thinking of there can be some bad outputs from this where you could upload the Jenkins image to another place and suddenly you're running a malicious Jenkins image because your proxy server didn't know which one to pull first. Or the client didn't know it was pulling from the wrong place. So, all right. Have I talked about 549? This one might be a little bit more. I suspect this can be an easy, yeah, we shouldn't do that. Copy and paste fail. Get the right link in here for folks. 549. Yeah, so this is, I actually had to go dig in because I didn't recognize the name of the person who was submitting this. So I started doing a bit of homework and they've got their own malicious registry out there that they had created just to test this out, which was if you as a client ask for a specific digest and the registry responds back, here's the manifest for that, and it tells you a different digest, which digest does the client verify? Does the client verify the Docker content digest header, or does the client verify the digest that it requested? And I treat it as a security vulnerability when the client didn't verify the digest that they requested, because I feel like that's what we should be doing. But the text of the spec doesn't really clarify that too much. And so I think there is some verbiage we should probably add to the spec to clarify that. Mike, you're just shaking your head there. You okay with this? No comment, no opinion?
We're going to allow this. I'm
It
being
is.
cautious. I'm being more cautious.
Yeah, this one
agree with you in general. If you ask for something, that you should test to make sure that you got what you asked for. However, I also understand that your client might have had the wrong SHA digest, and the server may be just say, "Hey, I got this link. This is probably the one you wanted."
But you requested by digest, not by tag. If you requested by tag, I could understand the registry saying, look, here's what you should have, here's what I got for you. And here's
Right.
the digest for it.
That's
If you
why
requested,
I'm just, but yeah.
if you as a client request by digest and you get back something different,
But just
that-
because requested by tag doesn't mean if you're receiving the same image, you shouldn't be validating. I'm just, again, right?
if you request by tag though, you don't have a digest to validate until the registry responds.
Manifest, that matches, right? I've already got in meta all of the digests from the original link. I'm going to presume that all of the digests are going to be the same in the index, including the digest for the manifest. So it should just work, right? If I'm asking by the tag and I see that the manifest gives me a digest, I should be able to check that and validate it. This is what I received the last time. It hasn't changed. And sure enough, none of the other references to the blobs layers have changed either, right? So I'm just saying there's a whole set of things that the client should be doing to validate these digests. Just over the history, right? But then, as we just talked about, what happens if I loaded the image from a tar? We have this kind of problem. It's cyclical. We haven't defined the security off paradigm for what should be happening to validate and set these images as, you know, inviolate, that they're clean, they're good. We know they're good, right? Because we put in the cache that we checked everything in the meta for that image matching this digest. Everything's been validated, possibly even having to run through a scan tool, right? We just haven't gone through that. I was hoping we would get into this discussion in our off conversation. But yeah, we're having the same problem with ensure secret pulled images. It's not just whether the digests are valid, but also whether you have access to this image that you're asking to use, right? I see it as the same problem. We don't really have a good verification, validation off, policy kind of section to the specs. And we could use that.
So we've got text in there now that says, if you see the Docker content digest header in there, that, let's see, they may ignore the value, but I think we also say if they use it, they must verify the digest matches the body. So they have to verify that header.
And by use it, I assume that means put it in a container and mount it and run that blob. Supposed to
if they see the header, this is the manifest digest. So this is the manifest that you queried, and you get this back. And so if you query by digest and the registry says, this isn't the digest you're looking for, try this one instead. And it comes back and says, here's the other digest I want you to use. The spec right now says, whatever the registry tells you, trust that.
But that's a huge what if. Are there any, going back to the earlier conversation, do we have any registries that will give you a different image than the SHA you over?
This person created an evil registry just to prove the point that you can. And so to me, it throws up the concern of if we have tools that are verifying that header and they are not verifying the digest they requested, then pinning container images inside of all of our Kubernetes manifests and all that kind of stuff does nothing, because the registry can ignore it and return whatever content they want to return.
Poorly written client.
I mean, the registry has the option to override the client digest.
Sorry,
I talked over you. What was that?
I was just saying that would be a poorly written client, and yes, we don't test the clients in the distribution spec. Are you adding that to the?
That's the next point. We'll get to that in a little bit here
Oh,
if we get time.
I got ahead of myself.
But
Okay.
but yeah, I did treat this as a vulnerability in my own client when I saw that I was looking at the header and I used that header to populate the digest that I was verifying.
Yeah. I agree. If you request, we should add that to the text. If you request by digest, you should verify that that's the digest you received.
Yeah. So
I would consider it a breaking, yeah, as well. Yeah.
all right. So that's their proposal.
But again, we don't have any validation testing on the client side.
No, we do not. So let's talk about that. Let's go ahead and jump to that, which is refactoring conformance test 548.
Oh boy.
I don't know if we're going to get this done in 8 minutes, but
So you're going to write some evil registry testing box. Oh man, sure, why not?
I mean, someone else has already done that. I'm leaving that sitting out there. Unfortunately, they made my client as the test example. I'm like, don't. But at least now they add a dependent bot alert on their own repository to upgrade.
Okay. I like it.
Yeah, so refactoring the conformance test, there was thoughts in here. This is ROM's list, which is, yeah, I might want to refactor a bunch of these things. Some of the stuff in here, I want to potentially swap out a lot of the other test codes. We were chatting about this at the beginning, but swap out a lot of the third-party libraries out there and try to simplify a bunch of this stuff so that we're using a lot more of the Go standard library, simplify a lot of as best we can. And in doing that, yeah, I'm
listening.
debating, do I want to take out the Go test syntax and just switch back to a Go build and actually build a conformance test tool that itself could be tested with Golang test? Right now, to build the test binary,
and distribution.
Right now, to run the conformance test, you run Go test with an output of the binary of the test binary.
Right.
And it's just like, well, now you can't test the test.
Okay.
So I am thinking about refactoring it so it's not under the whole test construct of Go and actually making its own first party. Here are the functions and the methods and everything to run the conformance test.
Yeah.
So that's in there. There's a bunch of other stuff in here though too.
You're going to run it against itself?
Just to be able to make sure the code is valid. I like writing Go tests for everything. And so if I've got some conformance test code, it would be nice to verify that the conformance test code is valid.
Okay. It's growing in size. The distribution spec now having a server and a client that could be considered as something that's forkable and usable, right? I'm just saying, do we need another repo?
So some of this that I'm looking at is how much can we do this to make it easier for people that want to submit changes to distribution spec to not have to learn a whole lot of external third-party tools to understand how the conformance test works to make a change. I'd like to make this as simple as possible. And when you're submitting a PR, they can read the conformance test and be like, oh, I understand how that works, and just add an extra line. Now that does go to one of ROM's requests, which is we should have client conformance test. And I don't have that in any of my plans.
Okay.
Rom, I keep spitting your name out there. So if you want to back this up with what your thoughts are, I like the concept. I don't know how to implement it.
Have you ever seen Cry Tools?
Cry Tools to me feels like it has a very distinct set of what they're trying to do, right? They're specifically for that container runtime interface there, where they know who they're talking to and from. They know they're going to try to run a container image, right? We don't know that that's what people are doing with distribution spec. They could be a Helm chart that's getting ready to be pushed up.
Well, CryTools is a set of libraries that include CryTest and CryCTL, a client to drive, right? As well as, I mean, the client really is the server side, right? I guess it depends what you're thinking, right? Who owns the containers you're running for test or the images that are being pulled? Because a lot of the Cry API already has these image services. The reason I'm bringing it up is because it's a way to do integration, and this is what you're headed. You're starting to say, I need some integration tests against the existing runtimes, the existing clients, the existing registries, right? And it's growing more than just a quick little spec test to check, right? One way to do it would be to literally import, right? To bring in some clients into your CI/CD and run them, right? At the command line, either through an integration bucket like CryTest. You could do an image test, or you just only use the image tests that are in CryTest. Just saying that's a current, thing that most of the runtime support.
So the challenge I have looking at the problem from client testing side, if I'm testing the server, I can start the server and I can throw data at it and verify I get all the right responses that I'm expecting from that data I'm pushing at it. If I'm testing a client, I have to start a server. I somehow have to tell that client to talk to the server and verify that they're sending the right request to the server.
That's what I'm saying. We have a Cry API that already allows you to pull images from any registry. We already have the buckets.
How from the distribution spec conformance suite can I write commands that tell Crane, that tell Containerd, that tell Helm to all talk to my registry and to expect that they're going to send a specific request?
Yeah,
because I threw out 3 very different tools out there intentionally, and there are a lot more that are even more different. How do I tell Cosign to talk to my container registry in a certain way that I can test it?
Each client is going to have its own set of configs, its own set of ways to use it, right? And much like with CryTools, what we've done is have a different set of CI/CD for each of the clients, right? For setting them up and running them. You can do the same thing on the server side if you want to just poof up a registry, right, for the execution test, as opposed to using some anonymous, right, account that you've pre-specified. It's going to hit the limits. But yeah, I'm just pointing out before you go ahead into that, there already are a lot of image tests that we have that already run across a set of clients. Maybe not all the clients, but they can add themselves to CryTools. It's already there. And I was really initially just mentioning it as a pattern, not necessarily as what we should do. I'm just saying we've already been here and done that, right? And went a different direction so that we were actually testing with real clients and real servers, right? Real registries.
Rob, I see you in the chat. Do you want to jump in before we finish this thing up?
No, I mean, just as a motivation for this, so just like customers are interested in picking a registry by looking at the conformance test results. Similarly, I think customers may be interested in figuring out which client to use based on the conformance tests for these client, the client side. So that's I think the motivation there.
Yeah.
And the third thing that could happen is maybe there is also a matrix that comes out of here, which is a cross compatibility between registries and clients. So if you use this client, only this registry works, or things like that. So a lot of these things can come out of this.
The other thing to know is just sort of a heads up. Once you do, if you're running the client as the driver to talk to the registry, the client's going to have special enabling code that makes the client work with any particular registry that it may otherwise have a problem with because it's not supporting the OCI the same across, as other registries would. So yeah, you still need this registry tester using some, very basic OCI only kind of, you need a new client if you're going to beat on the registries, right? Just as you would need a new registry if you want to beat on the clients.
I think that's what we're looking at, is that latter case of, do we have to write an OCI only registry that doesn't have any other APIs, any other features that, really hammers clients and makes sure the clients are doing the right fallbacks and whatnot?
Are you thinking further downstream and that this would be a library like Yamoki? Or are you thinking just for testing?
So this is for writing a client validation to say these clients are valid against an OCI registry. They're making valid OCI calls.
Just for testing. Okay.
So a conformance test. And so it's for someone to say my client is OCI conformant. We don't have that today.
Okay.
Because we don't have a good way of saying here's a good way to force the client to run all the various calls we want to make it run.
Yeah.
And then we'd need to make the server that receives all those calls and validates each of those calls too.
Okay. So we're not going to make those public services. we're not going to expect people to bring that package in and use it.
So I'm not ready to write that, but it is on the list of requirements that ROM has right now. And so I don't know how to implement that.
Because somebody's, as soon as you have a real client and a real registry, somebody's going to start using it to build their own from scratch.
I wouldn't worry too much if someone extended it and started using something, but I think the big question is, can we write something that does that in a reliable way?
Well, it's not so much the worry, it's we only have so many resources for open source projects, and creating something of this extent that's only going to be used for tests. Okay, how do you get more maintainers to want to work on that, right? When one way to bake that in is to say, oh, and here's some libraries that it's going to provide, that you could extend, right? But yeah.
I mean, for me, the biggest thing is, how do I write the code that forces the client to trigger all the different APIs that I want to test? That works across all the clients out there.
That works against all. That's the trick. It works against all. I was going to say, we got a plugin service. You can write a plugin for containers. No, that wouldn't be fair for the other runtimes.
Well, you just said the magic word, runtimes. Not everything is a runtime that's talking to a registry.
Yes, correct. Yep.
There's a lot of stuff out there that's not doing completely different stuff, that's not even working with container images.
Yep. Oh, not even container images.
It's pushing up arbitrary artifacts, signatures, SBOMs.
Right. Other artifact types.
Yeah.
The OCI ORAS guys had some stuff getting started. Yeah.
All right.
All right.
Let's return this talk next week, because I think there's a lot more in this to chat about. All right.
Yeah.
Have a good rest of your week, and hope anybody in the hurricane path, which I think in this group is just me, so it's just me that has to worry. All right. Everybody else have fun time without the rain.
Cheers.
Cheers.